Making his return to the beat is Yuval Noah Harari. The renowned historian and professor has authored some of the most influential nonfiction books today. Sapiens has over 45 million copies in circulation in over 60 languages. Barack Obama recommended it as essential reading for understanding the history of civilization, while tech titans have recommended or clashed with Harari's AI and tech theories for years. His new book is Nexus, A Brief History of Information Networks from the Stone Age to AI. Welcome back.
Thank you. It's good to be here.
Great to have you in person. Like many people, I've read a lot of your works, including the new one, Nexus. You offer a different lens for information and a focus not only on whether something is true or false, but what the information does. How does that lens apply to some of the propaganda that our viewers are very familiar with in America? Say Donald Trump lying about the election.
Well, the key thing to realize about information is that information isn't truth. Most information in the world is not truth because the truth is a very costly and rare kind of information. This kind of very naive thinking that if we just flood the world with more and more information, the truth will float up. It won't. It will sink to the bottom. If you want to write a true story, you need to do a lot of research. It takes time, energy, money, whereas fictions and delusions and conspiracy theories, you just write whatever you want. The truth also has another problem, which is that it tends to be complicated, because reality is complicated, whereas fiction can be as simple as you would like it to be. And people usually prefer simple theories, simple stories, over the complicated ones. And the last point is that the truth tends sometimes to be painful, to be unattractive. Whether it's the truth about me personally and my life and relationships, or the truth about the history of a nation, there are often dark chapters there that we don't want to acknowledge. And fiction, you can make it as attractive, as pleasant as you would like it to be. So because the truth is costly and complicated and sometimes painful, if we don't invest in institutions, in mechanisms to help the truth float up, then we will be flooded with junk information and fake news and conspiracy theories.
So you mentioned pain. We've heard a lot about Trump's pain and that he lost and didn't want to face it.
Yeah.
But his followers increasingly preferred his false story, their side won, over the truth that they lost, that they were rejected. Do you think then part of the reason that was a sticky or effective piece of propaganda is it already appealed to that side, that group?
That's part of it. But, you know, I think we should broaden the perspective and look not just at what is happening in the US, but what is happening all over the world.
Well, Yuval, I don't know if you've been to this country. We don't really do that.
Well, we can try.
No, we could try.
We can try.
It was actually a joke offered not for its truth, like so much information. Go ahead.
You know, if you look at the US today, maybe the only thing that Republicans and Democrats can agree on is that the democratic conversation is collapsing, is breaking down. People can no longer agree on even the most basic facts. They can't listen to each other. They can't hold a reasoned conversation anymore. And this is a bit strange, because we now have the most sophisticated information technology in history, and people are losing the ability to talk with each other.
Yes.
And there are many explanations about what is happening in the US, something about US society or politics or history, but you see exactly the same thing is happening in Brazil, in my home country, in Israel, in the Philippines, in France. So it can't be some unique condition to this or that country. And the suspicion is that something is at fault with the information technology of our age, which is really destroying the democratic conversation. And democracy, in essence, is a conversation. Dictatorship is from dictate. One person dictates everything. Democracy is a conversation. For most of history, it was simply impossible to have large-scale democratic systems because there was no information technology that could enable a large-scale discussion between millions of people spread over vast territories. So the only examples of ancient democracies are very small scale. City-states like Athens or Rome, and even smaller tribes. All the big systems, all the kingdoms and empires are authoritarian. You begin to see large-scale democracies emerge for the first time in history, only in the late modern age, because of the rise of new information technologies like the newspaper and radio and television that make it possible for millions of people to hold a conversation in real time. So democracy is really built on top of information technology. And every time there is a major change in information technology, there is an earthquake in democracy, which is what we are feeling right now.
Yeah, it's funny when you put it like that because people generally have an easier time seeing it in the past than as it happens, which you well understand as a historian. So when we describe the shift from, we just had a presidential debate.
Yeah, I saw it.
The shift from, the shift, we'll get to that, but the shift from the political communication of radio and FDR giving radio addresses to television, and Kennedy did well in the TV debates. We have an easier time seeing that shift than what you're describing that we're living through now, which is if people are feeling like it's getting worse or conspiracy-style candidates are doing better than before. That may be because of the tools, as you say. I want to read briefly from how you describe information in the book. You say it doesn't necessarily inform us about things. It puts things in formation. Horoscopes put lovers in astrological formations. Propaganda broadcasts put voters in political formations. And marching songs put soldiers in military formations. And that brings us to your concept of the information network. And I wanted to ask you, and I finished the book, and you have many examples. I was reminded of how Richard Dawkins initially came up with the idea of meme. Today, that's an internet reference. But originally, he was talking about that before memes today. That certain ideas will spread more almost like an organism because they're of use to the host, which we don't like to think about it that way. If you tell me, Ari, I am more likely to remember this Rolling Stone article that said my favorite musician is great because it's doing something inside me, I might resist that and say, no, Yuval, that makes me feel like I'm some lab rat. I like that article because it was true. And that seems to be a risk situation for us that is exacerbated by today's networks. How do you explain that in the book and this network concept?
Again, the key idea is that information is not the truth, information is connection. It connects a lot of individuals into a network. Sometimes you can do it with the truth, it's not impossible. But very often in history, we use fictions and mythologies and fantasies to connect people together. And, you know, if you think about, say, images, portraits, what is the most common portrait in the history of the world? What is the most famous face in the history of the world? It's Jesus. Billions and billions of portraits of Jesus.
A lot of people don't know he was Jewish. You talk about it in the book.
Well, that's not the point, that he was Jewish. I mean, we have these billions of portraits in churches, in cathedrals, and none of them is true. None of them is authentic, 100% fictional, because we don't have a single portrait from his own lifetime. There is not a single word in the Bible about how Jesus actually looked like. Not a single word which says whether he was tall or short, fat or thin, whether he had blonde hair or black hair, or whether he was bald. Nothing. So all these portraits, they come out of the human imagination. They are fictional, and nevertheless, they are extremely effective.
And I'll let you finish, but within your theory, they come out of the places that were selling or colonizing off Jesus. So a lot of the pictures, whatever one thinks about the history, a lot of them imagine him as a European when he was clearly from the Middle East by their own story.
I mean, it's very common today seeing images of Jesus as somebody from Scandinavia, basically, and not of the Middle East. And again, we have no idea how he actually looked like. Again, it doesn't mean that there is anything wrong with it. You can use fiction is not a bad thing. You can use it to inspire people, to connect people, but it's important to acknowledge the fictionality of what we are doing, because it gives us flexibility about it.
So let's talk about whether that it's getting worse. There was earlier times in American history when a politician being caught in a single big lie was a big deal. President Ford famously was criticized, and it was seen as a huge deal that he made a false statement about how much control the U.S. had over Eastern Europe, that he was exaggerating how much control versus Russia. Donald Trump's been caught in his first term with 30,000 plus lies or misleading statements, beating all other officials. I'm going to show you some of his lies and how they range from material, as lawyers would say, something that matters, to just absurd.
People that have died 10 years ago are still voting. Illegal immigrants are voting. It was going to be hitting directly, and that would have affected a lot of other states. But that was the original chart.
You know, we won Georgia, just so you understand.
It's a little like the regular flu. It's going to disappear. One day it's like a miracle.
We stopped the missile launches from North Korea.
I was in Michigan. I don't know if anybody remembers this. 12 years ago, they gave me the Man of the Year.
They didn't actually give him that award or anything else. Here's my question for you that's different than the usual way we talk about him. Your book is more descriptive than prescriptive. You're not telling people how to use the information networks for the most part. But if somebody smart read your book and wanted to have effective lie information networks, they would design someone like Donald Trump.
Maybe that depends on your view of the world. I think that what we've seen here, in some ways, it goes back to Karl Marx. There is something that Donald Trump agrees with Karl Marx. That you see the same way of thinking on the radical Marxist left and on the populist right. This worldview that all reality is just a power struggle. That the only reality is power. There is no truth. That, and this way of thinking that humans, very cynical, that humans are only interested in power, that any human interaction is a power struggle, and therefore whenever somebody says something, it's a power move. There is no point asking, is it true or is it not true? The only question is, who are the losers and who are the winners? When somebody says something, the question to ask, whose privileges does it serve? Whose interests are being served? And this way of thinking implies that it doesn't matter what the truth value of a statement is. It only matters what is the power value of this statement.
And that works a lot of the time.
And that works a lot of the time. But again, this is a very cynical view of the world, which you see on both the extreme left and the extreme right. And it's wrong, because deep down, almost all humans, they are really interested in the truth, partly because you can never really be happy in life if you don't know the truth about yourself and your life. You think other people...
Well, I'm going to jump in. I like you saying that. I am intrigued by that. But that is probably not a fully empirically provable claim. There may be psychology that shows that, but there are countervailing examples. There are certainly examples in distress. We've heard stories from people who are in long-term prison or other situations, and they have to use delusion to get through each day. But a lot of people are living in situations, poverty, grief, where they do that.
And eventually, if you want to get out of these dark holes, yes, you use delusion and self-delusion as a protective shield in times of emergency, but you don't want to live your entire life like that.
Yeah, I mean,
But
you could go back to Plato's cave. I mean, these are philosophical debates.
Yes.
You write in the book also about that, what you're calling Marxist, which is really, at least in the West, has been seen as a critique of how things work. That there is no real international order because it's all about who has the power, and the powerful can get away with it. The postmodern version of that is that there's almost no truth. I mean, some extreme lefty academics make it sound like you can't measure science, which, of course, you can. Not all science is controlled by the military-industrial complex, even if there's pressures. What is the modern audience supposed to take from that? Because I also want to turn to what you call the naive critique of information. Explain that and what you think people can get from better understanding this. What would an informed citizenry look like if we actually could decode some of the BS that you're diagnosing?
And what we hear a lot, again, from people like Foucault on the extreme left, but also from Trump on the right, is that all institutions that claim to be interested in the truth, like journalism, like science, like the courts, they are not really interested in the truth. They are conspiracies, cabals of small elites that try to gain power by fooling people. So this is why we shouldn't trust them. And this erosion of trust in the institutions that are the truth institutions of society, they result ultimately in the collapse of democratic societies, because democracy is built on trust. When you have zero trust in institutions and in what people say, the only system that can still function is dictatorship, because dictatorship isn't built on trust. It's built on terror, fear.
But let me offer a distinction, and you could tell me how you think about it. Foucault would be on the outside saying these are all systems of control, that the prison system is not really about protecting people, it's a control system.
Yes.
Or civility, which we hear about a lot, is just what the elites want, because incivility could be used against them as one of the last ways that someone with less money and power might affect them. And that's on the outside. Trump and Bannon would look at this and say, well, no, we're not on the outside looking in, we're on the inside looking out, and the only truth is what we say.
But no, they also claim to be on the outside. They also talk about the elites.
But they are the elites, no? He was the president.
They deny it.
But they see it as operational, and Foucault sees it as a observation. Is that fair?
I'm not sure if there is such a big difference. Again, I mean, there are, of course, huge differences. Trump is not a Marxist, certainly not in his policies about taxation or welfare or so forth. The place where they meet is in this basic cynical view of the world and of humanity as just this power struggle, that everything is about power, that every time somebody says something, I'm not interested in the question, is it true or not, but only in the question of whose power is this serving, which is, again, destructive to the basic institutions of society that are, again, I said in the beginning that the truth is costly and rare. So if you imagine this ocean of information flooding society, and most of it is junk, most information is junk, most of it is lies, fake news, conspiracy theories, delusions, illusions, because this is very cheap and easy to produce. And you have these rare gems of truth which were very costly to produce. And how do we find them? So this is the job of institutions like journalism, like scientific institutions.
So let's talk about that as an authoritarian threat, and then I want you to still explain the naive view of information, so we're coming to that. But you write, with the connection here between what you're calling is these lies and the fake news and all of that, to how the strong man or woman wants to use that as an authoritarian, quote, the typical strongman deprives courts of their powers, packs them with his loyalists, seeks to close all independent media outlets while building his own omnipresent propaganda machine. And you chart how that could work with various technologies, but with, I would argue, some real warnings for what we need to think about where we're headed.
Yes.
I have an example for you that is not scary. It is silly until you think about the implications. And you know a lot of things. I read, your references are like, whoosh. In America, it's a big deal if you go back more than 3 elections. Okay. So if you make a reference and you say to someone, well, this is like, look at what Eisenhower did, people are like, wow, you're very learned. You go back 8,000, 15,000 years. Have you ever seen Trump when the lights went out at his rally?
No.
Okay, so here's a new one for you.
Okay.
A bit silly at first, but it shows in real time, very quickly, that among his fans, he can make the bad good or the good bad. This was originally what would be a gaffe, and I've covered rallies, as I'm sure you've been around politics. This is what candidates worry about. Being made to look foolish or stupid on a stage can be a very bad thing, and then it can go viral. So the lights go out in one of his early rallies. That could have been a bad thing, and then he takes control of it. Take a look.
Put them in our jails. Because to put them in our jails, they didn't pay the electric bill. To put them, oh, I like that much better. No, get those lights off. Off. Turn them off. They're too bright. Turn them off. Turn them off. Let's go. Ready? Turn off the lights. Turn off the lights. Turn off the lights. Turn them off.
The man is a genius. He's a PR genius.
He has them cheering for the thing that was originally embarrassing. You have a rally, you can't even keep the lights on. What do you see him doing there? And does the crowd care? Does it matter that up is down?
That's a good question. I need to think about that. I haven't seen this before, so it's a new one for me. But, you know, it's basically the ability to interpret a text to say the opposite of what the text is supposed to mean. So, you know, I'm a medievalist. My kind of original material was the Middle Ages. So one of the things you see in medieval Europe is the way that the Catholic Church can interpret things. It has a monopoly on interpretation. So you have the Sermon on the Mount, in which Jesus talks about, you know, love and compassion, and if somebody slaps you, you should turn the other cheek, and so forth. And you have medieval commentators explaining how this actually means that we should persecute heretics and burn them at the stake. And this, they really do it.
And burning people alive is not turning the other cheek.
It is. They find an interpretation that by saving them in this way from the flames of hell, this is actually doing them a favor and being compassionate to all the other people who might have been affected by their heretical views. And, you know, one of the people who advances this interpretation of the text, he becomes Pope. So, very powerful. I mean, what we know from history is that humans have an amazing ability to interpret everything from reality to a text.
But so to take it to the lights, which seems like a small thing, and you're saying to interpret the text of the reality.
I'll give you a much bigger example from Israel. Like Netanyahu, Benjamin Netanyahu, has been responsible for the worst catastrophe in Israeli history. On the
Security failure.
On the 7th of October. And many of his followers now point out to this catastrophe as a reason why he must stay in power, because he's the only man strong enough to lead Israel in this catastrophic period. So this is, you know, turn off the lights on a much, much bigger scale. And of course, the Israeli public is divided. You have, for half of Israelis, more or less, the man is the Messiah. He's a genius, a Messiah sent from God to save Israel. For the other half, he is the most hated figure in the history of Israel. And again, the only thing that can be agreed on is that, you know, if a major task of a leader, especially in times of crisis, is to unite the nation, then Benjamin Netanyahu is the last person on earth which is capable of fulfilling this mission. If you now go to the street in New York and you grab the first random person, that person has a greater chance of uniting Israel than Benjamin Netanyahu.
Right, and to your point, I mean, we saw that effect.
And this is also true about the U.S.
And we saw it after 9/11 in the U.S. You also have people in Likud who claim that Netanyahu has this hawkish approach, and you need to be strong and hawkish. The hawkish approach of dividing the would-be moderates and the peacemakers in the Palestinian community from Hamas and to divide and conquer also failed, right? You have a bunch of different versions of failure, and then people, as you say, interpreting it opposite. We are often told, fact check, respond to bad information with better information. You say, somewhat provocatively in the book, that is the naive view of this challenge. Explain.
And the naive view is this counter-speech doctrine that we just need more information, and if you have a lot of information, again, the truth will just come up, will float up, that in a kind of free market of information, the truth will win, and it won't. you need to tilt the balance in favor of truth. Because, again, as I said before, it's costly, it's rare, and more to the point, the truth is complicated and often painful.
Does tilt include stop, delist, censor?
No, not censor.
Okay.
But take responsibility. It's really an editorial question.
Aren't they all?
Yeah, it's like, you know, what is the job of an editor of a big newspaper? The Wall Street Journal, the New York Times. It's not to censor people. It's to decide what should be on the front page of the newspaper. You have all this ocean of information, and what you learn, your job is to see what is the most reliable information and important information. You don't censor. You don't tell people you can't say that.
But let's drill down, because you're still speaking at an altitude.
Yeah.
Is fact-checking always worthwhile, or do you see it as a kind of decision tree where if you are controlling the New York Times, some of that material shouldn't even be fact-checked on the front page because you're now platforming it? What does it mean to say it's naive to fact-check?
No, it's not naive to fact-check. Before you decide to put a story on your front page, you obviously need to fact-check it.
But I'm saying, what is the naive part? Because you say that in here, that the response to speech, bad speech with good speech, is itself naive. Mm-hmm. What makes that naive?
Again, the naive reaction is to say, okay, let's just have more information out there, and the truth will win as a result. It won't. The idea of a newspaper is that you have an institution which just doesn't just flood people with random information. It makes a rational selection based, for instance, on fact-checking, what to put the focus on. What we've seen with, for instance, social media is that algorithms are now playing this important role of editors, but the question that interests the algorithms and their human bosses is not what is the truth, but what will get user engagement.
Yeah, I watched your long discussion with Mark Zuckerberg, mm-hmm. and you don't have to comment on this if you don't want to, but it was like two people talking past each other for quite a while. Because you were raising substantive evidence-based points about the algorithm, and then he would broaden out, and he made it sound like he was the world's digital pope, and all he's thinking about is how to help community. But we know that's not true. Indeed, he has a fiduciary duty to make money, and as you put it, keep people on the screens. I want to ask one more question on the naive part and then move to other things, but
maybe I'll just comment on that.
Please.
That you know, they constantly raise the issue of freedom of speech. Mark Zuckerberg and Elon Musk and the other people who now control maybe the most powerful media platforms in the world. And they say, we don't want to censor human users. But it's not about the human users. It's about the corporate algorithms.
Right.
Humans produce enormous amounts of content on social media. They produce hate-filled conspiracy theories, and they produce cooking lessons and biology lessons and funny cat videos and whatever. And I think I agree with them that we should be very, very careful before we censor and ban human beings. But the problem begins not with when a human posts some hateful conspiracy theory online, but when the Facebook algorithm or the Twitter algorithm makes a decision to recommend and promote and spread and autoplay this particularly hate-filled video in pursuit of user engagement.
Right,
and this is something that the corporations should be accountable for.
Right, and I thought you were very important on that, and the language matters so much because you wouldn't be in a position to probably know this, but before this, I practiced First Amendment law in the United States. I worked for Floyd Abrams, who won the Pentagon Papers case and other big landmark decisions, and so we've done a lot of thinking about First Amendment and free speech principles.
Yeah.
A lot of them are bastardized in today's discourse by political and tech leaders to exactly the opposite of the point you were making, which is freedom of speech, that the government doesn't jail you for participating in public life or politics, is very different from what they want, which is control of volume.
Yes.
And as you just said, and maybe you can speak about this, Facebook, whether it meant to or not, for profit and other reasons, was turning up the volume on hate speech, which was correlated with violent attacks.
Yeah, and many of these companies, they still give the algorithms that are now the editors the task of increasing user engagement. And the algorithms experimented on millions of human guinea pigs and discovered that if you want user engagement, if you want to glue people to the screen, the easiest way to do it is to press the hate button and the fear button and the greed button in our minds. And this is what they did. And this is what they should be liable for. Again, it's like the editor of a big newspaper that decides to publish a hate-filled conspiracy theory on the front page. And when you tell them, what did you do? They say, you know, I didn't invent this conspiracy theory. I didn't do anything. I just decided to put it on the front page.
Well, as you know, in the United States, you say liable. Many of them are not liable because the Digital Millennium Copyright Act grants them a very special digital immunity. You think that should be ended?
Again, that they shouldn't be liable for the content produced by the users. They should be liable for the decisions made by their own algorithms.
Right, what I'm calling a volume.
Yes.
They should, you feel.
Because this is what they do. This is on them. It's not the users who are deciding what to put on the volume. This is what the corporations are deciding, and this is what they should take responsibility for.
And I have two examples of recent propaganda in American politics. One is from Trump. The other has been circulated by prominent Democrats. Both seem to fit with your point in the book that the information moves based on its use and its appeal and its rewards, not its truth.
Yeah.
Now, the first, I want to be clear with everyone. We don't have reports of people eating pets in the United States. And Trump has been pushing this based on what he has, his what you call information. He was fact-checked over at the debate. Take a look.
In Springfield, they're eating the dogs, the people that came in. They're eating the cats. They're eating the pets of the people that live there.
You bring up Springfield, Ohio, and ABC News did reach out to the city manager there. He told us there have been no credible reports of specific claims of pets being harmed, injured, or abused by individuals within the immigrant community.
Your theory says that information gets to him, Trump, and goes out. Why?
I'm not sure I understood. Why?
That the information, the propaganda, when I say why, I mean, what is it doing? Like, someone else would watch that and say, this sounds bananas, and would seem to be hurtful to him.
Yeah.
It correlates with his larger attacks on immigrants. But you have an information theory that says, don't look at the veracity to understand this, look at its reward. At least that's how I read it.
The reward is everybody is now talking about immigration.
Aha.
You know, in politics, the big question is not what are the answers. The big question is what are the questions.
Bars, yeah.
You know, if this election would be about immigration, Trump wins. If this election is about climate change, Harris wins. So deciding what is the issue everybody is talking about is the most important thing. And if everybody is now talking about immigration because of this ridiculous story, the immigrants are coming to eat our cats, in a way it still serves the purpose.
Very smart. So you know what Jared Kushner said? I mean, we knew you were smart. We already knew this. Obama said so. Do you know what Kushner said? He said conflict elevates message. Your point that this lie and the conflict over the lie still is battering immigration for days into the casual voter.
Exactly. And again, this is very old. I mean, all these lessons, humanity have learned them again and again throughout history. If you look at American history, so you go back to one of the founding scenes of American history, the Salem witch trials. Oh,
I got the witches. Wait, I'm gonna stop you there.
Okay.
I have witches, but I want to do the Democratic side.
Okay.
Are you familiar with another thing that's not true? And again, I take this part seriously, so I'm careful to say, which is an allegation I'm not going to repeat about J.D. Vance and the sofa.
No.
Okay. So it was a sort of a joke, but jokes can do a lot of work. And it was suggesting something I'm not going to repeat in detail, but that somehow he had some personal sexual activity with a sofa. Not true. the author of the viral joke.
Even if it is true, it's his own private
also
business.
his business, but for the
politicians, it's very important that we give politicians privacy. Democracy cannot survive if politicians, and it's none of our business.
A great additional point. I just mean to. You're right. I also just mean to say on the veracity. And so here's some headlines. What the J.D. Vance couch jokes say about social media. Tim Walz, J.D. Vance joke throws dirt, meaning getting rough with them by using lies. Quote, some say it's about time. Now, these are people who know this to be false. And now I'm going to show you some of these. Again, we're not trying to get into the thing, just like the pets. But here's some of how pretty top Democrats have gone there.
I can't wait to debate the guy. That is, if he's willing to get off the couch and show up. So, you see what I did there?
His running mate, as you probably have heard, is getting known for his obsession with couches.
Trust Donald Trump and J.D. Vance to look out for your family? I wouldn't trust them to move my couch.
How does that relate to what you say about false information, and is that bad?
Again, I think what is really bad about it is that in this case, it doesn't matter even if it's true or false. I think part of the problem today with politics and with the world in general is that the border between the private and the public is being eroded, that privacy is facing annihilation. And the politicians are maybe the first people to experience that they have no privacy at all. And I think that especially for politicians, it's extremely important that they have a private life and a private space where they, as long as they do legal things, they can do whatever they want, they can say whatever they want. I think that everybody, including politicians, have a right to stupidity and a right to say stupid things as long as they are legal in private. And it's none of our business. And if you destroy this private space for politicians, then very few people, except psychopaths, will go into politics.
Do you see Democrats echoing the Trump approach to lying? Because people say, oh, that's how you get tough.
It's now the currency all over the place, that this is how the game is played, and everybody is playing it.
Witches. You alluded to this earlier. I'm going to read the quote because I do think it helps. We've had many conversations in this country about conspiracy theories of various types. You pinpoint the reason you mentioned earlier, when people can no longer make sense of the world, quote, when they feel overwhelmed by immense amounts of information they cannot digest, they become easy prey for conspiracy theories. And then you have a rather long section on witches. I learned more about this witch problem of the old days here than any other book. But very serious consequences, many people murdered, including children. You write, witch hunts were a catastrophe caused by the spread of toxic information, prime example of a problem that was created by information and was made worse by more information. Explain.
Well, it starts with the printing press, with the print revolution. A lot of people think, and you hear it a lot in places like Silicon Valley, that information technology always is a good thing because it spreads more information, more truth. And one of the prime examples from history is the way that allegedly the printing press led to the scientific revolution. Well, it didn't. Almost 200 years passed between Gutenberg introducing print technology to Europe in the middle of the 15th century until you have the flowering of the scientific revolution with people like Newton in the 17th century. In between, you had the worst wars of religion in European history and the worst witch hunts. Witch hunts were not a medieval phenomenon. They were a modern phenomenon. And the printing press and the spread of information played a key role. Because, like today with social media, the print industry in the 15th century, they were pursuing user engagement. And, scientific tracts like Copernicus's, mathematical calculations about the movements of planets, this is not very engaging. But witch hunting manuals are. So one of the biggest bestsellers of early modern Europe was a book called The Hammer of the Witches, which is still in many ways influences our world today. QAnon and all that, it goes back to the Hammer of the Witches. In the Middle Ages, people thought there were witches, but they were not concerned about them. Some individual in the village know how to brew love potions and find treasure or whatever. Then they came with this theory that actually there is a global conspiracy of Satan-worshipping witches that is out to destroy humanity.
Well, you got to do something about that.
You have to do something about it.
Yeah.
And just to give you kind of a flavor of what kind of book it was and why it sold so many copies, so one of the chapters in The Hammer of the Witches is about the alleged ability of witches to steal penises from men. And it brings all kinds of evidence, like one man wakes up in the morning and finds that his penis is gone. So he goes to the village witch and forces her, like, bring me back my penis. And the witch tells him, okay, climb this tree. You'll find at the top of the tree a bird's nest. So the man climbs up the tree, finds the bird's nest, and inside there are all these penises that the witch stole from different men in the village. And the witch tells him, okay, now you can take your own, but he selects the biggest one. And she tells him, no, you can't take this one. This one belongs to the parish priest. Now, this was, you can understand why, one of the biggest bestsellers of early modern Europe. And it was a foundation of this global conspiracy of witches, which is still alive and well today in the world in conspiracy theories like QAnon. And it may sound funny, but it led to a huge, huge tragedy. Tens of thousands of people were tortured and murdered in unspeakable ways in early modern Europe because of this theory. And, you know, the more witch hunts, the more witch trials, there was more and more information about witches until people could not doubt it.
And these are some of the accounts of the attacks. Does it matter how many people believed this to really be true at the time or not?
A lot of people, most people, believe that it's true. There was so much information circulating about it that people said, okay, maybe we can doubt some of it, but not all of it. And the more people talked about it, the more difficult it became to just doubt the whole thing. So this is a classic case of how more information actually leads to a worse situation, not to a better situation.
Another question that occurred to me while I was going through this book and Sapiens, which we've discussed before, was we like to ballpark things sometimes in the press. Maybe we do that too much. But do you think that the majority of things people base their lives on for the majority of modern history were false?
Most of them were fictional, not false.
Yes, and I remember the distinction because we talked about it. But when you say, right, but fictional...
Money is fictional, but it's not false. I mean, it's...
Right, then it becomes, has an operational, it has operational utility.
Yeah, the laws of football are fictional, but they are not false.
What about things that don't operate as cohesively? So money creates an economic system that everyone understands is affecting their lives. Religion and astrology have consequences, but don't have the actual utility of money.
They can have a lot of utility. Again, depends what you do with them. You can use religion to inspire people to be compassionate, to give to charity, to build hospitals. And you can use religion to, launch witch hunts and inquisitions and crusades. So, like with money can build hospitals and money can, buy weapons. It's a question of what you do with it.
I wanted to read to you some of the critiques of your new book. I don't know if you remember, you do so many interviews, but we did this for the last time.
Yeah.
But now there are new critiques. I want to read this one at length so it has some substance and let you respond, which I think is interesting. And so much of what you do is analyze the world. So here's the world analyzing back. In The Guardian, it is written, they write about the new book, Harari is a master of sententious generalization, a passionate need to be seen to overturn received wisdom. Many people think the printing press made a crucial contribution to the emergence of modern science. Not so, insists Harari. After all, printing equally enabled the dissemination of fake news, such as books and witches, and so Gutenberg is partly to blame for the gruesome torture and murder of those accused of witchcraft across Europe, as we just discussed. Silly as that might sound, it also misses the fundamental point. Because the scientific method is accretional, modern science could only come into being once the results of previous experiments were widely available to those who followed them. Mm-hmm. Furthermore, quote, what can we do to save human civilization and our shared reality? Simple, concludes Harari. Subject algorithms and AI to strong official regulation and focus on building institutions with strong self-correcting mechanisms. So carry on being liberal democracies? It's a wan sort of conclusion to a book that has struck such an end-of-days tone. I wonder, how do you respond to the critique that as you look at the world and its emotions, this critique suggests that you are motivated by some sort of emotion, that you want to be different or that you're seeking some edge.
Well,
and then second, wait, I got to finish the question.
Okay.
And then second, although you don't claim to be, I would say, fairly a big policy prognosticating presence, that you've described so many problems, and by the end, what we get is carry on with maybe Scandinavian-style, thoughtful, objective, liberal democracy, and nothing else. What do you say to those two things?
Well, with regard to the first thing, the idea, for instance, that the print didn't lead to the scientific revolution and led to wars of religion and witch hunts, it's not mine, it's very common among academics who deal with these subjects. It's not familiar to the general public, and it's not familiar, say, to people in Silicon Valley, but it is that they're very familiar to historians of the 15th and 16th and 17th century. And what I do in many of my books is take things that are actually quite banal in discussions among historians and kind of repackage them in a way that makes them accessible to the general public. I mean, when was the last time that you had on primetime television a discussion about the print revolution and witch hunts?
Right now, baby.
But, you know, if you go to academic conferences, people would say, yeah, but everybody knows that.
Yeah, I know what you mean.
Why do you even bother writing about it again?
Yeah, lawyers are like that too, yeah.
So many of these ideas, they are not kind of sensational, slaughtering holy cows. They are just bringing the banal findings of academic research to a more general public.
But this impugning of you as some sort of fashionable writer, you don't buy that?
I want to be a fashionable writer. I mean, we try to sell books in the end.
Right, fair. I mean, yeah. and then your prescriptions.
Yeah, and this is not a book of policy prescriptions. Right. The main attempt of the book is to start a discussion and understand the big picture of what we are facing with the AI revolution, based on thousands of years of previous information revolutions. I try very hard not to kind of immediately jump into the trenches and like, this is the right answer and all these other answers are not right. So yeah, I do discuss some of the policy proposals, again, many of them not coming from me, but this is not a book of policy proposals.
Which I actually think is a strength of some of these books, although people can make up their own minds, and I was going to ask you about that as well. We spend much time in politics with solution first. People are running literally on their plans and platforms, and then all the conversation afterward. This is the exact opposite of how you would do enlightened policy if you weren't dealing with the muck of politics. You would gather all the evidence and material first, you would look at all the possible options, and then you would remain open to shifting those options. Yeah. COVID being an example where the true scientific community that was less politically influenced could continue to evolve over time. People who decided in week one that they hate or love masks were at a disadvantage, were they not?
Exactly. And again, with AI, we are just at the very, very beginning of the AI revolution. We haven't seen anything yet. So if you have like a very strong opinion about what we should do about AI, you know, centuries to the future, this is far too early. So, you know, I do think it would be a good idea to preserve liberal democracies for the simple reason that they are the most flexible political system that humans ever managed to create. And we need this flexibility. In a dictatorship, if you adopt a certain policy and it's the wrong policy, it's very, very difficult to change it. That is the big advantage of democracy.
Well, and as you've illustrated, the dictator will spend more effort trying to change people's minds and trick them to embrace the failure.
Exactly.
Whether it's COVID policy or farming policy or the lights going out, that's where they will exert their efforts, not fixing the underlying thing that affects people. I will say, with only 2 minutes left, I'm concluding our intellectual book interview.
Okay.
And now in closing, I just wanted to hit you with a couple questions. Last time we were remote, now we're really here. I am curious if you'd care to share what has been the room you've been in or the moment of all of this global role and acclaim that you've had where you've either been the most excited or inspired or thrown off balance, whether that's heads of state or tech titans. It is interesting, and I would argue positive, that people can, I don't know if you ever listened to Lin-Manuel Miranda, you've probably heard of, and Dave East. They're both musicians. You know Lin-Manuel? Hamilton?
Yes, absolutely.
He wrote Hamilton.
Yeah, the room where it happens.
Yeah, they have a song called I Wrote My Way Out. And it's about them growing up in tough neighborhoods and writing their way out of them to other things. You wrote your way into this role. Nobody handed that to you. And so I'm curious, as a way of introduction, any moments like that that you've experienced that you care to share, where you're sitting with whomever and you're like, wow, how did this happen?
Well, I don't know, the disappointing thing about the room where it happens is that actually you don't hear many wise things there because people don't have time in the room where it happens.
So when you're with really powerful people, whether you name them or not, you find it to be just fox checking?
In a way, yes, because, you know, when people are extremely powerful, they tend to be extremely busy. So and you always have to say, the feeling is you have to say only extremely important things. Otherwise, meeting is over. I have a more important place to be right now.
Well, I hope we didn't make you feel like that today.
And when you try to say only important things, you end up just repeating the same kind of slogans again and again, and you're always in the shallows. And again, one of my concerns when I talked about privacy for politicians, they don't have any time to really go deep. Because they're running from one thing to the other, from one thing to the other. And it's very difficult under those conditions because, you know, with...
All right, well, now I'm going to jump in. You sort of, this was more of a personal history. You sort of are making it intellectual. So I'll ask you another question. When is a time where you've seen a reaction to your work and you felt the temptation, you felt pulled away from your methods? I mean, your methods are very reasoned and objective. But you have been thrust onto the global stage. Have you ever looked and said, well, that's not right, or I should post a reply, or anything like that?
To like a reaction to world events?
No, to your work.
To my work. I try to keep myself detached. Otherwise, you go crazy.
Right.
If you just kind of follow what people are saying about the book or about you and react to everything, you can't really keep your balance of mind.
Okay. Last question is more simple. Someone listens to you, they read the book, they say, you seem like you got all these thoughts, you have warnings. If they become concerned, upset, depressed about these warnings or the conditions in their place, whether it's any country, as a citizen, what do you say to them? What do you do when you have that feeling? Final question.
Join an organization. That if you really want to make a difference in the world, if you're concerned in the sense that you want to change things, it will be very, very difficult to do anything by your own. 50 people who work together in an organization, in an institution, can accomplish far, far more than 500 isolated individuals. So our superpower as humans is the ability to connect, to cooperate. So again, if you want to change something, either join an organization, or if no organization exists, start an organization.
Yuval Noah Harari, thanks for being here.
Thank you.
Really great to do it in person. The book is Nexus, A Brief History of Information Networks from the Stone Age to AI. You can get it wherever you get your books.